How's it going, Olly Rowland?
It's going well. Mark Konstantinovic.
Bit cold in here.
I'm okay.
You going to survive this one?
I'll live.
Been through worse, haven't you?
Been colder.
This is what today's about. Last time we spoke, we touched a little bit about your story as a whole. Mm-hmm. And of all the podcasts I've done so far, I think you're the one that's most unexpected, because a lot of people in my circles of music know that we're mates, and then they listen to your podcast and they're like, we don't get it. So you used to be a stuntman, now you like manages like all these people in CTK and Dolly Parton, and your story being on sets and throwing yourself off buildings and blowing yourself up as a you know a kind of body for hire.
Yeah.
I want to start right back from what I think is a particularly interesting point about you, which is all of the stuff you've overcome in life. Is one of the things that I find quite inspiring, and also when I speak to other people, they find it quite inspiring, because when you were younger, you were diagnosed with diabetes. Mm-hmm. A lot of people are going to know that feeling. I looked it up earlier. I think 1.5 million people roughly a year just in America diagnosed every day. Take me back to what it felt like. How old were you? Talk me through the process when you get that news. How does it feel?
So I was 17. I was on set of Terry Pratchett's Hogfather. I was doing extra work. I wasn't even doing stunt work at the time. And I was like ridiculously thirsty, peeing loads. My vision went a bit blurry, and I was really, really tired. And I left set, and I called my dad on my way home, and I was like, yeah, I've got all this whiz. I can barely read the road signs. Like, I'm not sure what's going on. And he jokingly said, sounds like diabetes. Went to the doctor the next day because I still felt the same. Took a blood test. My blood sugar levels was like, in England terms, it was English terms, it was 29, and it's meant to be between 4 and 7. So it's like, yeah, this isn't good. So did a load more tests, and turned out I had type 1 diabetes, like out of nowhere. So the type 1, for those that don't know, is like the genetic one. Type 2 is like either from being overweight or getting older, you can develop it. But type 1 is the one I had. Couldn't trace it back in my family. Just randomly one day had it. So.
Because you were like at the height of your kind of athletic ability back at 17 as well. It's not like you'd been smashing the donuts. You were. Nope. It was a complete curveball. So type 1 is pretty much just a genetic predisposition. Something triggers it, and then that's it, basically.
Yeah, I mean, we joke about the hot sauce incident in New York triggering it when I was with you, when I drank a bottle of hot sauce. But yeah, it could be anything could have triggered it.
Maybe drinking the bottle of hot sauce.
Maybe drinking a bottle of hot sauce wasn't the most helpful, but I made $40, so.
I think it was about $28.
Well,
don't elaborate.
Winning. But so yeah, something triggered it anyway. But yeah, I was literally fighting fit. So I just done my first dan black belt at karate. I was doing all my stunt training. So I was like trampolining and rock climbing and horse riding and swimming and like super fit. So no explanation that made sense for it. But
what's it feel like being a 17-year-old kid and having that card dealt?
I think it's the same kind of attitude I've had most of my life, which was like just, well, what you can do about it? Crack on. Like, if there's nothing you can do to fix it, then it is what it is. And then being that young, I also buried my head in the sand at that time, and which, ignorance is bliss kind of deal, which was stupid.
Why do you, when you say...
Because I just chuck an injection in and go, that'll do. I never tested my blood. At the time, there was no kind of constant glucose monitor patches or anything, so it was a finger prick, and just couldn't be bothered to do it, so I didn't do it. I just put a bit of insulin in, that'll be fine, and just kept doing that till my early 20s.
Because for people listening, taking them through that journey, because I mean, my knowledge of it, I still have so many gaps too. But the idea when you have type 1 diabetes, for those who don't know, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're putting insulin in your body, and that's what breaks down the sugar because your body's not creating that anymore. Is that right?
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So your blood sugar levels, you eat anything, normally, as a healthy human being, your pancreas produces insulin, it breaks down the sugar, breaks down the carbohydrates, and that's all good, and your blood sugar stays level. With me, the pancreas stopped working, so I need to inject insulin every time I eat to break down the sugar and carbs and all that kind of stuff.
So as a 17-year-old kid, you're obviously not at the height of your dietary...
Correct.
Correct. Not looking after what you're eating so much, you're out drinking quite a lot.
Correct.
How did you cope with that? And if you throw yourself back to other people who might be listening at that young age, being able to kind of learn from your experience, what was the process like? Did you just kind of ignore it? Like you said earlier, that was a mistake, how you ignored it. Like maybe unpack that a bit. So,
yeah, I did ignore it until, like I said, my early 20s. And the reason I'm regretting it now is kind of like the long-term not damage because I've been able to fix a lot of it, but like the diabetic retinopathy, which is where your eyes start getting damaged, basically start getting blurry and blurry and blurrier, where the small blood vessels and capillaries start bursting in your eyes. Basically, you're bleeding inside your eye and it starts blocking your vision. So the last kind of year or so, I've been having, maybe less than a year, I've been having injections in my eyeballs, like 2 in each eyeball, each session, to fix that, which is now fixed, which is awesome.
That sounds fucking horrible.
Yeah.
Is it as bad as it sounds?
No. But again, it's like the mindset, well, what are you going to do about it? You got to do it or you're going to go blind. So nothing I can fix or change about it now.
So this retinopathy, this is something that you think back from when you were a kid, when you were 17, when you're ignoring that, being so good with the insulin. It's that time when this kind of damage is... Exactly.
I was ignoring doctor's advice, and you need to do this, or you're going to get this disease, and your eyes are going to... and your foot's going to fall off, and all this stuff. And you're like, I'm 17, nothing's going to stop me. And I'm 20, nothing's going to stop me.
Crack open that Haagen-Dazs, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm going to eat a whole tub of Ben & Jerry's and a Domino's pizza and all the other stupid stuff I used to do, and a packet of whatever. So... but then once I kind of hit 30, just a bit older than 30, then I was like, things started going right. The eyes being really the main one. But yeah, so I wish I'd listened and concentrated a bit more, because there was definitely a lot, like I was all about the fun and ignoring it. And I think there's definitely a line where I could still have had fun and not been such an idiot or naive or ignorant or insert correct adjective here.
So you're speaking to your 17-year-old self now, and other people who might be listening who are going through the same journey you went to. What's the advice you give to your younger self?
I wish I just tested my blood. I wish I'd just been on it more and tested my blood more. And I will say now is a lot easier for new diabetics, because you can have like the constant glucose monitor, which I have on the back of my arm.
What is that? How does it?
So it's a tiny little patch. Looks almost like a nicotine patch. It sticks in the back of your arm. It has a tiny little hair-thin needle, which is a sensor, which can move around. It's not solid metal, so it doesn't hurt. And then I can just scan it with my phone, and it tells me what my blood sugar level is doing. Whereas before, when I was younger, you had to keep pricking your finger. Your fingers get really sore. You got to make them bleed, and it's a whole thing. And it's like, I don't know, I can't be bothered. So, and that was a big part of it. Whereas I think if this technology was around when I was a kid, when I was 17, I would have been a bit more on it. So yeah. But my older self, I couldn't be bothered to keep pricking my fingers. And also, when you're young, you don't want to carry around all this stuff. You had to have a little pouch with all the testing strips and the needles and the reader itself. It was twice the size of an iPhone, that little pack on its own. And then your phone, and then your insulin pen, and then, all the other stuff. So, yeah, I was definitely an idiot, and I definitely think it's a lot easier now to control and keep an eye on. And since I was kind of in my mid to late 20s, I was a lot more on top. Well, as soon as I got the glucose monitor on my arm, I then was on it a lot more, because I can test unlimited amount of times, and I need to make my fingers bleed. My hands don't get sore. I don't need to carry anything extra around, and I don't care about having a patch on the back of my arm. I forget it's even on there. So, but yeah, I wish I tested my blood more and just been a bit more on it at least, and a bit more responsible.
Do you think there is this way up with you? I mean, obviously I've known you for so many years, but do you think there's a way up where that kind of like nonchalant, don't give a shit attitude, just going to crack on, can't control it, whatever, caution to the wind. There's some benefit in that, isn't there? Mm-hmm. Because even from a young age, with that diagnosis, you strangely kind of went from strength to strength early on, and you started to say, there's nothing that should stop me doing anything I want to do, whether that would be driving a motorbike to the Arctic Circle or going on these ridiculous trips where you wouldn't have any medical support out in the wild, or, I'm interested to go through this story. And I think the angle for me, which I find really interesting, is I can only imagine other people at 17 who might not have that same attitude, who get diagnosed, who are impacted a lot heavier mentally, and then maybe don't know about other people who are diabetics, but still manage to go and live life and do all of these crazy things. So, On that note, when you start to swing back to that age after your diagnosis, what was one of the first adventures that you went on where you started to think, well, how am I going to kind of cope with this being diabetic?
I think just to start with that, the first thing which I think helped my mentality was when I met with a diabetic doctor soon after I'd been diagnosed, within a week. and told him I was training to be a stuntman. I wanted to be a stuntman as my job. And he said, "Oh, no, you can't do that. You need to get an office job. You can't be diabetic and be doing anything active." And
that's straight, just like... Right.
Absolutely, like, no, you can't do that. And it was like a red flag to a bull. And I was like, okay, hold my beer, watch this. And that was probably the...
Why are you drinking beer in your doctor's office?
That was probably the start of it, because that annoyed me. Because I was like, well, you're not going to tell me what I can and can't do. I don't. No. But and then to be fair, the nurses I met with were a lot more down to earth and go, no, you can do everything. You just got to, be wise with it. But it shouldn't stop you doing anything. And I was like, right, that's what I'm going to stick to and live by. So then fast forward. So I was 17 then, and then when I was 20, I booked to do my first. So I'd done a couple of film jobs. Actually, no, I'd done my first big film job, which was Robin Hood, and then myself and Frank, who we went to school with, Frank sent me a link to the Mongol Rally, which was we take an old inappropriate car from London to Mongolia and drive it the whole way. And I was like, that looks pretty cool. And then Robin Hood came along at the right time. That I had a load of money coming in and hadn't spent it on anything. I was like, let's go do this adventure.
What were you doing on Robin Hood? What was your...
When I first started, I was a horse groom. So just helping get the horse, and I had no horse experience, just help getting the horses ready and just winging it, pretending I know what I was doing. I know I obviously got caught out, and I was having the stunt boys were giving me riding lessons, and so I rode a little bit on it. I was looked after the horses. I got to do a few cool things. I was in one of the buildings that they burnt down and did some cool stuff like that. It was my first toe dip in the stunt world, and working with the boss who I worked with for about 8 years after that for the Marvel films and stuff. But yeah, that was my kind of first learning movie, I guess, if you will, where I started getting used to everything.
And you took that money and you bought a Hillman Imp.
I bought a 1974 Hillman Imp that didn't run. My dad went and picked it up with me on a trailer. We brought it back to my parents' house. And then when Frank was ever back from uni, he'd come around and we'd try fixing it, getting it ready to go. And then summer 2009... we set off from Goodwood Racetrack in London and started driving to Mongolia.
I mean, is that the point to take something that just barely works? Is that the idea? Is that the whole experience? The
whole experience. So the adventurers are the company that run these adventures, and their whole kind of ethos is you take an inappropriate vehicle on an inappropriate adventure, knowing you're going to break down, you're going to get stuck, because then you have stories to tell, because you're going to meet locals to help you get out of it, or you have some insane story, which I now have like many of from all these trips. And so that's the whole kind of concept of it.
What about because there's so much stuff to go through, and I know that you've skipped past it. Give us one from that trip. So you're taking a car from London, you're driving it all the way to Mongolia. What's one of the highlights that happens on that journey for you?
There was a lot. So, I mean, our car was terrible. Just to put things into perspective, we left Goodwood Racetrack, and we broke down twice on the way to Dover. The brakes failed, and the battery failed. And then we were driving from Calais to Paris, and we totally just all the electrics turned off in the car on the way down to Paris on the middle of the motorway. And so that was the first day one of the trip. So the car was totally inappropriate. And then we were in Ukraine. This is probably my favourite story from the whole thing. We were in Ukraine, and Frank's visa hadn't been processed properly, and the dates were wrong. So we were we were trying to get it sorted. So we get into Kiev, and we park up in the town centre, and our car's got like vinyls all over it that have our like website and go donate to our charity and all that kind of stuff. And so it drew a lot of attention. So we were off getting lunch, whatever we were doing. And I wrote a message at the time. It was like Facebook wasn't even really a thing. Like on our website, what did you used to call them? I don't remember, like forum, I guess, or post board or whatever. Wrote like, we're in Ukraine, in Kiev. We need some help. If anyone's here that speaks Ukrainian and English that can help us, please reach out. Here's my mobile number. And then that evening, we're at our hostel that we were staying in, and I get a call from a Ukrainian number. And it's a guy called Bogdan who's seen our car in the town square or in the city centre and taken some photos and gone home and gone on our website and seen the message. And he was like, oh, I speak English and I'm Ukrainian. So calls me, takes us out to dinner. Really nice chap. I've been speaking to him a bit recently, actually, because of everything going on over there. And takes us to dinner, takes us around. We explain our problem. We need to get Frank's visa fixed so we can get into Russia earlier. Otherwise, we were stuck in Ukraine for like 2 weeks longer than we needed to be. And so he says, "Yeah, that's fine. I'll pick you up in the morning and I'll take you over to the Russian embassy." So, okay, because he speaks Russian as well. Like, perfect. So he goes to help us out, takes over the Russian embassy. Nothing they can do about it. He's like, "Okay, I've got a plan. I can get you an apartment really cheap. Well, just stay in Kiev, enjoy Kiev for a few days. Then you can drive over to the border, stay with my mother. My friends are over there. And then as soon as you can cross, then you can go into Russia." Okay?
Sounds like you're about to get like trafficked to something, but like
he very much is a very, very just nice chap, family man, and he was interested in the car and the whole idea of it all. And I have no reason to believe otherwise. And so the next day he sets us up in an apartment that was like the equivalent of staying over Times Square or Leicester Square, like the middle of Kiev, where like everything happens. And we were paying like $20 a night. It was nothing, and it should have been a lot more. And it had it, it was a great apartment. So we stayed there for a few days, and then said our goodbyes to Bogdan, and he took us out. We hung out with him and his wife quite a lot, Yulia, and then he sent us on a way to head towards his mum's house on the border of Ukraine and Russia. So we drive over there, and as we're pulling into this little town, tiny little town, a big Nissan Patrol 4x4 that's all done up for off-roading kind of skids in front of our car and blocks us from moving in the middle of like a 3-lane highway going to the town. This older guy jumps out, and this young lady jumps out, and she comes up and starts talking to us in English, and she's a translator hired by this guy who's a friend of Bogdan's from back in Kiev.
right.
And he said, Bogdan called me through the translator he's got with him. Bogdan called me and said to look after you guys, take you to his mum's house and make sure you're good.
Oh, okay, right.
I was like, okay. Great, these are really lovely people. We were so trusting and naive, and I will say we had no reason to not think otherwise. But looking back and telling the story back, everyone's like, "Are you mental? No one's that nice." Yeah. So he takes us to Bogdan's mum's house, meet her. She's lovely, and then 2 more of Bogdan's friends who also know this other guy are there waiting for us.
And this is where you get robbed.
Not yet. Well, no, not at all. It never happened. So one of them's like big, muscly, roided guy, and others like a big, huge, just massive guy. And they're there, and our car had started to mess up a bit on the way to this town. So they said, one of our friends is a mechanic. We can drop your car off there and leave it there for a few days to get fixed. I'm like, okay, fine. Go and drop it off this random personal garage, not like an actual business. Meet the guy. Doesn't speak any English, and we kind of point to what's wrong, and off we go. Hang out with Bogdan's friends for a few days. They take us all over the place, go-karting, going to like these nice dinners. We didn't pay for a thing. These guys were paying for everything. Then we go and pick the car up, and we go out to a restaurant that evening. One of the guys eats a pint glass in front of me, a glass like you're drinking out of.
Must have been like a fake one or something.
Nope. So we're all doing shots. We're all doing shots of this, literally that, and he just picks it up and just bites the rim and just crunches the glass up and then just starts chewing it. Yeah, it was mad. And so we're drinking...
And how sure are you there wasn't like a sugar...
100%.
Fake sugar
100%. It came over from the barman to our table. Like, he didn't just pull it out of nowhere. We're doing shots of this drink that's like their delicacy or whatever, and he has a pint of it, downs the pint of the liquor that we're doing shots of, and then eats his pint glass, or half of it, not all of it. And then I get my camera out. So I filmed it. I said, do that again. I film him doing it. So I've got footage of him eating this pint glass, just eating it. Anyway, mad. Then weirdly, like, we hadn't even finished dinner. And then the main guy had been in the Nissan Patrol a few days earlier. He goes, we go. I'm like, okay. He's like, we go now.
Didn't tell you where? Or?
Nope. We didn't pay for anything. We stood up. We all go outside. Well, at this point, we'd met the Irish guys that I ended up finishing the Mongolia Rally with. So we went in a convoy. They had a little 2-seater Nissan pickup truck. We had our Hillman Imp. And then we had the Nissan Patrol in front. And then the other 2 guys, they had their own Subaru or whatever, was following us behind in like a convoy. So we're following the Nissan Patrol. We start going through the woods. And like we're meant to be heading to a main border between Ukraine and Russia.
And you don't have the car with you?
We're back in our car now.
Okay, you're back in the
We've
car
got
now.
our car back.
But you've got no idea where you're going. You're just following these.
Well, it's meant to be the border, but we're in the middle of nowhere, middle of the woods in Ukraine. Like, this is not a busy main road.
Right.
And so we're shitting it. We're like, what the fuck do we just keep following? What do we do? This is weird. We pull up to this tiny little outpost, and it's all gated and fenced, and it is a border. And we go in there, and both of our visas were wrong because they had it was a clerical error. It was
missing a stamp or something.
It said like it was a transport visa, and we should have been on a holiday visa or whatever it was. It was something stupid like that. So the guy, I wish I remember his name. It was something stereotypical like Vlad, but he told the girl just to go out back. This is the girl that works at the border. He walks around the desk and goes on the computer himself. He stamps our passports, gives us them back, walks back round again and go, okay, you're good to go. And so, okay. And then they tell us that one of their friends in Russia will meet us in, was it Volgograd, or I think it was the first city in Russia that we went to from there. So he's like, go there, meet our friend, and they'll look after you. Well, okay, fine. So we drive over the border through no man's land into Russia. It took us like 6 hours. It was like midnight through like 6 a.m. to get through the Russian border. We stop for a nap, and then we drive into the city, which is about another 2-3 hour drive. And then this was so we were driving in, and then this blacked out Mercedes S-Class pulls in front of us, and again in the middle of the road, stopping traffic. The guy jumps out. Me and Frank jump out, and he goes, "Ollie, Frank." We're like, "Yeah." He goes, "Follow." I'm like, okay. So we get back in our car again, naively, ignorantly, whatever, following this random man we've never met before. Drives through the cities, running red lights. We turn up at this place. We kind of go through the other side of the city.
I mean, he's running red. What? Just going blitzing straight through junction.
Yeah, he's got no number plates on his car. Everyone else does. He has no number plates on his car. We get to this place, this huge fenced-in kind of compound. I'm like, what the fuck? So we park up, and they say, yep, just leave the car there. I'm like, very much leave the car exactly there. I'm like, okay. We go in. He's taking us to a brothel, a big compound brothel. And we're like, which we didn't realise, again, idiot, young, 20-something-year-olds. We go in, and they say, oh, yeah, we've got a room ready for you. And so it was like 4 beds in a room. We went up there, kind of got settled. We're like, should we go down to the bar at the hotel? I think it was just a normal hotel-type deal. Go down there, and there's all stripper poles in the hotel. Like, and as we'd come downstairs, sat in the garden in the courtyard, were all these like stunningly beautiful Eastern European ladies. And we're like, this isn't a hotel, is it? And in our wimpiness, scared of female mindset, we just went and hid in our room for a bit. And then the guy who had met us earlier came and knocked on the door. I said, do you guys want to go for dinner? We'll take you out to dinner. So, okay, fine.
And you're not asking why?
Nope.
Is there not one point where you're like, what is this about? Like, why are you spending this money entertaining us? You've got us, like...
I think we were asking each other that, like, what's going on? This is crazy.
Was there an air of, like, intimidation?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And, but also curiosity.
Yeah.
I guess. We're like, oh, free stuff. Like, all right.
Curious Olly comes
into play. So we get in his car. We get in his car, and he takes all 4 of us out. We turn up at a restaurant that's closed. He bangs on the door. Someone answers, lets us in. Restaurant is closed. Gets a table, gets us the menu, whatever you guys want. Just order whatever you want. It's like, okay, sweet. So we order whatever we want and have some wine and whatever. Then he takes us back over to the brothel. And we go back in our room and stay the night. And then we leave the next morning. We're like, right, we need to get going and make up the time we lost in Ukraine. And we get in the car and we just leave. And we didn't pay anything to stay in the hotel, to go to the restaurant, to stay with Bogdan's mum, to any of the other stuff we did. Didn't pay a penny. And looking back since then and telling this story, people have gone, well, you smuggled something from Ukraine or Russia.
The first thing that comes to mind is your whole, like, chassis must have been stuffed to the brim full of, like, $10 million worth of whatever it is.
Yeah.
Heroin, cocaine. They've just stitched you up. Because that makes sense to me. It's like if you find a couple of tourists who are driving across the border and you just go, yeah, come stay with my mum, go to this brothel, have dinner. And you're just like, yeah, all right. Do you reckon you were? Do you think you actually had...
The only reason I think against it is Bogdan was the first guy we met, such a nice, lovely dude. And I've spoken to him since. I'm friends with him on Facebook. Like, that's the only thing I think. Every other part of that story and everyone else we met, I'm like, yeah, we smuggled drugs or guns or something. Like, but Bogdan was so nice and helpful. And it also, as you travel through Europe and you kind of head east, like, everyone is helpful on the whole. As in, like, a lot more helpful than you get in England or America in general.
One or two things. It's either the fact that because we're so used to English culture, as soon as you leave, you realise that actually people are quite nice.
Yes.
Or it's two, which is you've just been dealing with the mafia for...
Yeah, I was dealing with the Ukrainian and Russian mafia and smuggling things in my 1972 Hillman Imp or whatever it was. So that's probably my best story from the Mongol Rally, I think. And then how it kind of ended for us. We were going through Kazakhstan on this old dirt road, and the car literally broke in half. The chassis and body bent.
Right.
All the windows popped out because of the way the body had bent. The gearbox opened up on the floor. We got towed, I think it was like for 13 hours through the desert in Kazakhstan.
Jeez.
On like, it's not even a road. It was a road maybe like 50 years earlier. So it was just full of potholes that the whole car would disappear into. Like, not exaggerating. We got pulled over by the police on that road, and they were stationed like halfway and basically said, you either pay me, I think it was like $100, or I'm taking you back the way you've come to the police station, like 6 hours back that way. So we had to pay the bribes and do all the stuff. And then we kind of got to this city in Kazakhstan, and I think Frank was kind of over it at this point. And so we disposed of the imp, like took it to the police station and whatever, and signed it all over to the Kazakh government or whatever we did. And then Frank flew home, and I jumped in this 2-seater pickup truck with Ralph and Donal, the two Irish boys. And we did the rest of the trip in.
You made it
that.
all the way to Mongolia. Because I was just my geography's not too good, but I didn't realise that you went through Russia to get to Mongolia.
Twice, yeah. So you do Ukraine, Russia, then Kazakhstan, then back into Russia again,
right? And
then Russia into Mongolia.
Would you do it again?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah. Heartbeat. And I'd want to make it a bit more difficult.
Well, I mean, quickly bringing that back to how you kind of on-ramped into that story. What was it like when it came to things like medicine? Because if I'm right, insulin, you got to keep it cold, or is that so?
Yeah, so insulin has like a 30-day shelf life once it's outside of the fridge. So usually you take a pen out, and I use a pen in about a week. But I was gone for 8 weeks total, but 6 weeks driving. So we had a cool box that we wired into the car battery.
Right.
So every time the ignition was on, the cool box was a fridge essentially, and I knew it had to stay on for at least a month of the trip, because then the insulin would last the last month. So we nursed it through the kind of first 4 weeks, and then I had I'd bought a load of these little cool bags they use for keeping insulin cool, where you wet them. They're like little gel packets that get really cold when they're wet, and they last like 24 hours. So after the imp died and the cool box was kind of gone, I would then, every hotel or every chance I got, would soak these bags, keep all the insulin, just make sure it was as cold as it could be, and that was it, and that was fine. That got me to the end.
Fair play. So you've always found a way around it then, really, when it comes to these things.
Yeah, and you have to, like, yeah, I mean, you just have to adapt. You can do, in my opinion, you can do everything, and like I think through like the other adventures we'll talk about in a minute, you just have to figure some stuff out. You got to put a little bit of extra effort in compared to what someone who is, doesn't have diabetes or whatever has to do. But you can still totally enjoy and have exactly the same experience. You just got to put a little bit more effort in. And
then I guess it helps if your adventure happens to be taking a bike into the Arctic Circle.
Yep. So that was the next one, I think. Yeah, that was the next one.
I remember the feeling I had when you told me about that. And I remember you were saying how this trip had never been done before, and you were basically being sent out to test it. Mm-hmm. So it was like a new idea that someone cooked up in some office somewhere and went, oh, I reckon we've got an adventure. We'll drive whatever the little scooters, weren't they, with a sidecar?
It was a Russian Ural motorbike, yeah, with a sidecar.
The thing that freaked me out about it was the idea that you would essentially traverse, like, and this is not like you're driving through towns. You're driving through, frozen wasteland in minus whatever degrees. I'm sure you're going to tell us in a second. And it was a test. It wasn't something that someone had done and gone, oh yeah, this is the finish line, do it. It was this idea of, there's a legitimate chance, like a really legitimate chance you were going to die. And I'm interested in you telling the story about that adventure, especially when it comes to being diabetic and how you plan for it, but also the mentality of like why you think you do this stuff. Like what drives you to go and do this? I had a podcast with Sir Ranulph Fiennes a couple of episodes ago, and asked him the same question. It's like, why? Mm-hmm. So many people listening would be, why would you even do that? Take a bike that you barely understand, it's probably going to break down, you're going to be in the middle of nowhere, you're going to freeze to death on your own. Mm-hmm. Why put yourself through that?
I think there's two reasons to it. You want me to start with that or start with... Yeah, I'll start with... So I think there's two reasons to why I like to do this stuff. One, if I'm brutally honest, is ego. if I'm brutally honest, like doing something I can show off about, like, yeah, no one's done this. I've done something that no one else has done. Look how cool I am.
I'm sure not many people have died on their own in the middle of it.
Well, no, and so that's the second part. So the first part is definitely, it is what it is. It's like, yeah, I get to tell some cool stories like we're doing now. But the second part is like, it's the challenge of it, because the feeling at the time is miserable most of the time. But the feeling afterwards, like when you get to the finish line, when you finish, you're safe, you're done, retelling the stories and reminiscing about the amazing adventure you just had, that's addictive. That's an addictive feeling. And the story wouldn't be interesting if, I was sat in a nice warm 4x4, brand new, that was working great, and I drove up to the Arctic Circle. It's not as interesting as I was on a motorbike. It was minus 45. I was camping every night. The bike barely worked. It was a 1970s Russian Ural. And I had to spend hours fixing it, and no one had done this route before. We were off-roading, we were going up a frozen river. Like, it's all this crazy cool stuff that you just don't get to tell that story if you're in a vehicle that's easy to do in, on terrain that's easy to do it, traveling around like that. It's not your backpacking around Europe. And
so it's the challenge of not knowing whether or not you're going to die. Is part of the excitement for you. It's like, that's the point.
Can I overcome it? Yeah, because it's so dangerous. It's so dangerous, but it's not like I'm going to jump off a building. Will I survive? Dangerous. There's the odds are a bit more in your favour. Yeah, but it's definitely that. Can I do this without hurting myself, or can I complete this and then have cool stories to tell afterwards?
So, same question as asked before. Like, run us through the general gambit of like what you were doing, and then what's the story that you choose from your Arctic Circle Ural expedition?
So the way this came about. So the Mongol Rally, when I did that, I paid to kind of do it, and so the adventurists of this adventure company, where you basically pay, they give you a start line party and a finish line party, and everything in the middle is up to you. Mm-hmm. There's no set route, there's no whatever. And so this one, when I finished the Mongol Rally, I was chatting to Tom, the owner of the company, in a bar in Mongolia. And I said, you should do something with motorbikes. And he's like, I've been thinking about that. He's like, would you be interested in doing it? And I was like, yeah, I'm down, just call me. And then like 18 months went by, and I get a call out of the blue from Tom. He was like, I've got the motorbike adventure. I was like, okay, just tell me. Just like that. Literally just like that. Yeah. And he said, but I need someone to go test it and be like, do the pioneers version and see if it can be completed.
Yeah. Be the guinea pig.
Exactly.
Be the lamb to the slaughter.
Exactly, a guinea pig. Yeah. And so he explained it to me.
He's thinking that, who's dumb enough?
Correct.
I met this guy 18 months ago. Okay, right.
Correct. So he explained it to me. It's basically going to start in Irbit, which is where the Ural factory for the motorcycles is or was. And you're going to take an old Russian Ural that is going to break down and barely works, up the frozen River Ob, and off-road or whatever, and basically head north until you hit Salakard, which is like the last city before like the Arctic research centres and stuff. So it's right on the Arctic Circle. You can do it in the middle of winter. It's going to be like minus 40, minus 45. Cold enough, borderline to freeze oil and fuel, and there's no hotels. So you're camping.
How do you get around your fuel freezing?
Light fires under the bike.
No.
In the morning.
Just light fires under the fuel
In
tank.
the morning, yeah. To warm everything up. And you can only, and so the things with these bikes is the ignition system was the thing that failed consistently with them. It was the worst part. I'm not going to geek out on it, but it's the worst parts of an ignition system taken from both a motocross bike and a normal motorcycle. So there's timing and all this stuff, very fiddly things that need to be fixed and adjusted. And the temperature makes them go out of time, therefore the bike won't start. That's essentially...
And I imagine your fingers are numb as hell, so you can barely...
Well, you can only take your gloves off for about 45 seconds to a minute, really max, before you can't feel them anymore.
Jeez.
Before you can't feel your fingers anymore. Yeah. So the main... I've got a few stories, but from that first trip, we had gone down a wrong road. I say road, we've gone down a wrong track. And what we had these GPS trackers on us, so the adventure company could basically come find us if we had died or if we stopped moving or whatever. Yeah. And so, but there was a login on the website, so you could see, you at home in England or whatever could see where I was, and my dad was on that constantly. And we'd got a bit lost, and I'd spoken to my dad on the phone. He was like, no, it looks like you're on the right road. You're good. Keep going the way you're going.
Was that like through satellite?
Yeah, so the thing pings every like 10 minutes.
Right.
Up to a satellite and just plots your position on a map. So he was looking at that map. I didn't have the map. I didn't know where I was.
Didn't have a map because that was part of the...
No, we had a physical map, but the roads aren't mapped.
Yeah, I imagine.
So I could see the landscape and the rise and fall of the height of land and whatever, what's it called, the topography. Yeah. But I didn't know where I was because on the map there is no road. So Dad's like, no, you're on the right road. Keep going that way. So we've been on it for like 3 or 4 days, the same road. And in that time, we'd made a rule we weren't going to ride at night. And that went out the window pretty early on because sunrise was like 9 a.m. and sunset was like 5 p.m., 4 p.m. One day it took us like 12 hours to get the bike started because it was so cold. So you think you have a minute at most to fiddle with what you're doing. And then you had to do that. Yeah. Like warm your finger, like putting your hands in your armpits or put your gloves back on or whatever and warm up. So it took us all day. So we were like, okay, we're going to ride at night. We had this crazy ride down this track, and the road stopped being a road like kind of 2 days before, and it turned into just to an old. It was like 2 roads of like 2 foot wide concrete that was spaced a car's axle width apart. So like you had to keep, if you were driving a car, you'd have to keep the tires on both sides. But it was so old, all the concrete had cracked and was all jagged, and like it wasn't flat at all. And it was also just a bit wider than the axle width of the Ural and the sidecar. So you could only either have the sidecar running in the snow in the middle of the 2 concrete tracks or the bike, one or the other. And so we're going down this track at night, and it was like I got off at one point to push the bike, and the back wheel span round as I over-revved it. It ran up my shin, tore a load of skin off my shin. Who else got injured? There was a few injuries at the group. So there's 4 of us that were doing this on 2 bikes. We were teamed up.
If you end up getting off the bike, you crash, you hurt yourself badly, how long is it taking someone to get to you?
Oh, that one would have probably been a helicopter.
But like...
It would have had to have been, but even, I don't know.
Hours, if not...
Oh, a day at least.
A day. So you're just really out in bumfuck.
Yeah. Like you can hear wolves at night when you're setting up camp and... Yeah, it was mad. It was mad. And like when you put your tents up, you have to build a cold sump because it gets so cold. It's basically you dig a ditch around your tent so the cold air floating along the ground kind of drops in that sump and helps keep you warm. And it was cold. It was horrendous. But so we're on this road anyway. We rode through the night. So we stop for a minute, and I find one of these hand warmers, the ones you break apart or whatever, and the non-reusable ones in the middle of the track. So, oh guys, we must be on the right road because we started doubting ourselves
because someone's dropped this.
And it only would have been one of the Western lot using them. So like someone's dropped a thinger here, and they've been here recently. It's sat on top of the snow. Okay, great, we're on the right track, and so we carry on going. And then the next day, Nick, who was one of the other guys with us, he says, "I've got something to tell you guys." That hand warmer was mine. When you were fixing the bike, so I'd walked up ahead trying to find help.
Why didn't he say that?
I don't know. He didn't say it at the time. Told us the next day. So we'd got all excited, thinking we were on the right road. So we did another day's worth of riding up this wrong path, unbeknownst to us, because my dad's still like, "Yeah, you're on the right road." What it turned out was my dad was looking at a road that was about kind of 20 miles to the west of us that ran parallel. There was an actual road that was going to like one of the small villages. We were on an old logging trail that had not been used for like 40 years. So we're stuck. And so it got to like day 5 or 6. We're pretty much out of fuel. We were out of food. And we got up in the morning and we were like, we're leaving the bikes. We were just going to abandon the bikes. We were going to shrink down a smaller backpack each and go off on foot and walk back the way we came. To try and get back to
in the middle of the Arctic Circle, run me through that because maybe I'm just jumping to conclusions, but I'm sure a lot of people listening would be thinking the same. Surely, to walk back that distance with no food would take days, and the chances that you were going to survive that would be.
I mean, the only thing we had in our favour was that we had the right clothing and stuff, so we could stay warm, and we had shelter, and obviously you melt the snow so you can have water. We had fire starters, so you can do without food, but and we had access to water, so it was fine. So that was what we were preparing ourselves for. So we were all shrinking down our bags. We were getting prepared to leave a load of stuff there.
Were you not bricking it when that was happening?
I was more annoyed and fed up, I think, than bricking it. I don't remember really being scared. I was more frustrated that we hadn't completed it, which I guess goes back to your original question on why do I do it, is because I want to complete it and finish something that is deemed really difficult.
Without dying.
Or losing a limb. And like with everything in life that I do, I'm like, I get annoyed if I don't complete something properly.
I heard one of the things that Serrano Fines told me was about when you're going for a piss. Because people, which is apparently a common thing,
dick check.
For a piss,
you got to do dick check.
And if they don't do their flies up properly, and they don't tuck their dick back in, then
Dick falls off.
It can literally freeze off, and it happens quick enough that you barely notice.
You won't even know. So you're wearing so many layers that you can't even see down there, right? You've got like 3 pairs of trousers on. Anyway, so you're lucky if you don't piss inside one of the of the pairs of trousers.
Warm for a minute though. So.
But yeah, you have to just turn around to one of your guys and go, "Have I put my dick away?"
That's brilliant.
They have to do a dick check to make sure you've actually tucked it back in, because otherwise, because you've got all these layers of coats on as well. And that goes back to another thing we were talking about earlier with the diabetes. When I first got out there, I spent a day just with a thermometer checking the layers of each coat and jacket I was wearing to see where the right temperature was, that my insulin wouldn't freeze, nor it would get too warm.
Gotcha.
So it was like the second coat in the inside pocket is where my insulin would live, because I knew it wouldn't freeze and it wouldn't get too hot. And so I did that little thing. It took a bit of extra time out of my day, but then I was able to do the journey just like everyone else. And it was fine.
And what would have happened when you talk about like this? Well, because we'll go back to this point where you're out of food, you're thinking about going on foot. What happens if you don't have insulin? What happens if the vial breaks? What happens if you find yourself in a situation where you don't have it? Like, how does it work? How long have you got?
I mean, well, if you've not got any food, it doesn't really matter, because there's no reason to inject if you're not eating.
So you only inject insulin when you're eating?
Yeah,
Sorry for the stupid question.
Yeah. So when your blood sugar goes high, which is caused by eating, you put insulin in to make sure it stays level.
So, assuming that you still had some food, then what's the situation? So once you lose your insulin, and once you don't have any insulin, you're not eating any food. Is basically what you're saying. That's the rule.
Well, you're kind of burning stuff as well. I mean, I don't know what I would have done in that situation. I think you have to eat if you've got food, because it would be silly not to. But if your blood sugar level gets too high, then you can go into the opposite of a hypo, where it goes too low, and you can go into like a coma or whatever. The other way, just whatever. But for me, I think my pancreas still works slightly. That I can cover a bit. You know, if I ate, especially if you eat like proteins and lettuce and stuff, it's fine. But it's the carbohydrates. I would have steered clear of chocolate and sugar, especially. Maybe like a sandwich would have kept me going and wouldn't have made my blood sugar go too high, depending on what was inside it. But not that mattered, because we bought a loaf of bread the first day and it froze solid and turned into a brick. So we soon realised we couldn't buy bread, because it was like literally a block of ice. It was only good for hitting 10 pegs in.
So what happens when you're getting prepared to go on foot then? How does that story round up?
Okay, so it's the morning of, I think it was day 6 or day 7, out on this one road, and everyone's just packing their bags down. Everyone was pretty quiet, and we ate pretty much the last of our food. We like cooked up porridge or whatever we were having, and then we hear an engine, and I'm like, what the fuck? And all of a sudden we're all very excited to like, what is that, and where is it coming from, and how do we go get their attention? And we hear it coming from the same direction we'd been coming from, and it's this big what do they call it, an urag or something, a big 4x4 kind of van, and these 3 Russian guys jump out. And I'm assuming what they said in Russian was, "What the fuck are you lot doing here?" Because it was the most random thing. These 4 haggard British guys that are just like, "Thank God you're here. Please help us." Turns out they were out hunting. They were out on a wolf hunt in their van, and they'd been out sleeping in this thing that was built for being in the Arctic and had like a separate generator for being warm and all that kind of stuff. And so they didn't speak a lick of English. We didn't know enough Russian that we could really explain, but the bike's kaput, and they figured that out. They had a look at it. Obviously, couldn't fix it either. So they towed our 2 motorbikes, carried on going up this track for, I think we did another day. We did it all that day. So by nightfall.
How many cars and other vehicles had you seen in the 6-7 days?
None.
Do you not look back at that and think that that's like some form of divine intervention?
Yeah, I mean that was
because I just from understanding the geography and how like the distances you're talking about, you never make that by foot. You never, like, you're dead in the water.
I mean, well, people walk to the Arctic Circle and walk to the South Pole and stuff. It's doable.
Probably doable, but also dying is quite possible as well.
Oh, for sure.
So just by chance at exactly the right moment,
we were still with the bikes. We hadn't set off. We were just kind of we just finished our breakfast and we're getting ready to literally put backpacks on and start walking.
So lucky.
Yeah, and so they towed us up the rest of this road, and there was a little logging village that we got to at nightfall. They went to the police station with us. There's one police officer that worked in the whole village. He let us in. We slept on the floor of the police station that night. And then the next day, the policeman helped us organise a logging truck that was heading to a little town north of the logging place, where we put the bikes on the truck. And he said, there's a mechanic in this village. And so the next day, we put the bikes on a truck. We all were in the back of the truck, freezing, just because you couldn't even move around back there. Like, literally, I remember I was laying down underneath our bike, and every time we hit a bump, because it's not a road, it's all off-roading.
Yeah.
Every time we hit a bump, the like bike suspension would like bash on. I had a huge bruise on my left butt cheek from where I was laying underneath this bike. And we eventually get to this next village and get dropped off at this hotel. I'm like, what do we... And I say hotel, but I use that term very loosely. What do we do? And these random two guys came over who were in some Russian motorcycle chapter that lived in this village and wanted to help us. And they took us to their house. They towed our bikes for us on their car. Went to their house. They cooked us lunch, got our bikes in their garage. They had all the tools. And they started helping us fix, and they had their motorbikes there as well. They just ride in the summer. And they get our bikes fixed and help us out, and then we're off on our way again from there.
It's unreal how lucky it is. And also, I guess, the natural camaraderie you'd have to have when you're out in those more isolated, deserted places because, you know, 1 minute it's you getting rescued and the next it's them. And it must be a much tighter community of people out in those kind of...
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everywhere is super helpful. Because, I tell you what, though, it puts into perspective is how, we're kind of weak, but like how in Western civilization, we're a bit wimpy, or a lot of people are a bit wimpy. Like, there are old ladies that, you know, we're talking like 80-year-old, 90-year-old ladies in minus 45, just shuffling across the ice, going to the shop to go and get their bread or whatever they're getting, shuffling back again, not complaining, just cracking on. They've got to get their log fire going to heat their little house and, you know, just getting on with it. And everyone helps everyone. And it's again, really nice people. Didn't really have... I mean, I didn't tell you about the gun thing with the arm wrestling. I didn't tell you that story. I don't think you
ever told me that story. That's a fun thing about doing this, because obviously we're mates, but doing this in such a way is kind of interesting, because you kind of... What's the gun?
So before we even started the trip, so we're in this tiny hotel in Irbit. Irbit is in the Ural Mountains.
Okay.
It's a town in the Ural Mountains.
In Russia?
In Russia, yeah,
right.
Where we start the trip. And so we got there a few days earlier because we were seeing how the bikes work and learning how to ride on the ice properly and all that kind of stuff. And no one in Irbit has ever met an English person, right? So no one speaks English at all. All the menus are in Cyrillic, and there's no like pictures or anything. So like, oh, how do we order food? So we're in like the hotel bar trying to order food. And so we got the girl that worked there kind of got used to me and Mark and Rob and Nick doing like animal impressions for basically, we want chicken. So we go like, anyway. So one of the nights we're in there, we're having a few drinks, and these young Russian guys.
I like to think that they could all speak English, but just enjoyed
I kind of hope so too, thinking back. So these young Russian guys come into the hotel bar to have a drink. It's really the only bar in town. They hear us talk. One of them spoke a little bit of English, and they're trying to get us into arm wrestle with them. They'll come and arm wrestle with us. I'm like, oh, no, thank you, it's fine. It's like, and he gets his gun out and puts his gun on the table. Now, bear in mind, this time I've not lived in America. I'm not used to guns. I don't even have my shotgun license I have in England. Like, not used to seeing guns. Probably like one of the first handguns I've ever seen. And I'm like, oh, fuck. And at this point, it's just me and Mark downstairs still. So Mark was my friend from Scotland.
When you got it out, was it intended to be intimidating?
Well, that was the impression it gave.
I really want to arm wrestle.
That was the impression it gave.
Okay.
So me and obviously again, I was like fighting fit at this time in my life, and Mark was with this huge Scottish sheep farmer, like super strong dude. And we're like, okay, so we go over, and then our idiotic competitive streak kicks in, and fuck this guy's gun, I'm going to beat him. So when me and Mark start beating him in an arm wrestle, and then they start ordering vodka shots and making us drink the vodka shots, and then arm wrestling us again. I'm like, okay. And we do all the arm wrestling, and then the guy's like, he loses to, I think he lost to Mark again, and then he goes, we go outside, and picks his gun up. I'm like, oh, fuck, we're going to get shot. And I'm like, oh, god damn.
Of all the things I wanted, this is how I go.
Yeah.
Right?
So
arm wrestling competition gone wrong.
Yeah, so we go outside with the guy, but it turns out he just really likes us, and so he sets a load of beer bottles up on a snow pile in the car park of the hotel, gives us the gun, and lets us just start shooting at these glass bottles. And we're like, is this okay? And he goes, yes. And he like mag dumps his 1911 he had into the snowbank in the middle of a town.
And no one
said a word. And then we're like, okay. So we were like shooting his gun in at these glass bottles. Yeah, a handgun. Yeah,
that is mad.
Yeah, and anyway, that was just a quick side story. I forgot not told you that. So that was kind of people that we're meeting, and then when I would say about the adventures and the stories, is that kind of the stuff that you remember? You're like, yeah, that was cool.
That is crazy, and also very telling in terms of how free a lot of I mean, for good or for better or for worse, but for him to just trust a couple of random Westerners going, yeah, come on, let's go shoot. And
yeah.
That's crazy.
So anyway, that was that throwback. So then, but yeah, so we got the bikes fixed and we finished the trip. It took us about 2 weeks in all. And yeah, we were a group of, I think there was 10 of us out there total. Did we all complete it? I don't think everyone completed it. And there was 4 of us, 2 motorbike.
What? So you managed to get the bikes fixed, and then you still went for the finish line? Mm-hmm. Oh wow!
So we got.
You didn't turn back. You went and completed.
Yeah, we got up to Salakard, which is in the Arctic Circle. We got up there.
What did it feel like when you finally crossed that finish line? And you?
We got in at like 3 a.m. because what was weird. So we were on this like snow road. And we could see the lights of the town because it's a fairly big town. It's the last point that all kind of shipping containers and stuff will stop at before they go. You know, there are trucks on like an ice road that goes. There's one ice road that goes there that we weren't on, but that's where the trucks all go to deliver stuff up to the Arctic and go to research centres and the little villages and stuff are up there. And so we see the lights and we're like, oh, we're nearly there. We'll be there in an hour. An hour goes by and so I don't think we're any closer. And then another hour goes by. And it's like 8 p.m. And then, yeah, it took us till 3 a.m. to get there. And we also started to get reckless. So, like, I'm just pinning the throttle wide open on the Ural. Like, I just want to get there. And I'll never forget, because Nick, who was on the other bike, explained it to me. They were just behind us. And all of a sudden, our bike just disappears. And I hadn't seen a 6-foot drop in this snow track. Because everything's white, right? And it's late. You've got no idea of gradients, texture, whatever. And so I've just jumped our Ural 6 foot. Bear in mind, it's loaded down with bags and 2 people and all that, whatever. And yeah, we just jumped off this thing and crashed down in this ditch and carried on going. We're like, it's banging a bit now, Ollie, from Rob. I'm like, we're still going. I think it's fine. And we just carried on going the rest of the way. And we get in at 3 a.m. and we're just so happy. All we want to do is eat and have a hot shower. Because it's been, 2 weeks since, because you just don't wash. It's so cold. And like Mark had these wet wipes with him. He was like, yeah, I'll wash with these. They froze solid within 2 hours of leaving the first thing. Again, it was all only good for hitting 10 pegs in. I bet. And, but yeah, so that was the first time I did Siberia and did the Arctic, was that trip.
I just think the really cool thing about this is bringing it right back to that 17-year-old kid who was diagnosed, not sure, a bit confused about what was going to come up. The doctor who told you you're never going to get an office job, don't do it. I think it's such a nice place to come to, and I know that there's probably even more adventure stories that are going to come down the line, and I'm sure we're going to do this every once in a while. But that's the thing in this episode I really wanted to land, and I hope that for people listening, I can only imagine what it must have been like. I know your attitude was very nonchalant, and I know you sort of say, yeah, fuck it, I'm just going to crack on and do what I want to do. But there would have been an element of like being freaked out and being unsure, and for people that young especially being diagnosed, I hope that they have someone they can listen to and be like, you know what, I can do anything I want to do.
Well, that trip is what started the Diabetic Adventurer, which was a whole thing I came up with afterwards. It was like, because I started talking, it was actually someone I worked with, their daughter, a 14-year-old daughter got diagnosed with diabetes after I got back from the ice run. And
same kind of thing, just total luck of the draw.
Yeah, parents didn't have it, just totally out of nowhere. And so they asked me to just go talk to her, and I did, and realised, one, that like the British, I don't know, maybe across the board, but the British medical system was not the most helpful, especially for young diabetics. And it freaks them out. I'm like, my life's ruined, and what am I going to do? And so I felt like talking to her, I was like, well, this has genuinely helped. And her parents told me, well, thank you so much for talking to her, because she's now got a whole different view on things. And so I came up with this idea of the Diabetic Adventurer, and I'd worked with JDRF and Diabetes UK as the charities I'd raised money for on the Mongol Rally and the Ice Run. And so I reached out to them. I was like, I'd like to kind of go out and tell my story and tell people what I do, whether it's the stunt work and the adventure stuff, and kind of talk to kids and young adults and their parents. Like, here's all this stuff I've done. And just by adapting slightly, compared to what a person without diabetes would do, I've been able to do all this stuff and live this life and not, apart from my naivety and testing my blood when I was younger. But as a whole, it's not.
But that's also part of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is you get to say, look, I've managed to do this stuff, but I've also done this stuff wrong early on, and that I might have changed looking back.
Yeah, exactly. So I started the Diabetic Adventurer. So then I was going around talking at kind of diabetic wards and children's diabetic wards in the UK. to parents, teenagers, young kids, 5-year-olds, about, I'd show on slideshows and everything I've been doing. And then that led on to doing more adventures with the adventurists. I went out to Siberia and the Arctic another 3 times, and I went to India and went across India, and with that story with the girls out there in India. I went to Zanzibar and Tanzania and did a boat race that I filmed, and I'm jumping in bull shark infested water with a camera. And
well, the one that I'm looking forward to going through when we chat next time is the time you got kidnapped in. Was it or your friends got kidnapped? I'm trying to remember.
Tanzania, yeah.
I mean, because I'm not going. I don't want to open this one up now because I know I'm going to start wrapping up this episode. But I'm looking forward to doing this with you again, and most importantly, having this down as something that I hope does some good out there. I'm hopefully going to run some promotions on this and get it out to the sort of market online where people might be able to find this. And just like the talks you did to that young girl, hopefully you can be. Maybe a bit more of a positive guiding light to a lot of people out there. So
people can reach out to me on the best way. I get people messaging me all the time on @the diabetic adventurer on Instagram, and then I'll reply to any messages. People want to know anything or ask questions or advice or whatever, then send me a message on there and I can respond.
Game on. Well, I'm looking forward to more adventures next time, Ollie. Thank you very much for being on this episode.
Thank you, mate.
And I will see you again very, very soon.
Yes.
Nice.
Cheers, mate.